For decades, depictions of Neanderthals emphasized the male hunter, crouched behind a spear, facing mammoths and cave bears. But recent analyses suggest that women in Neanderthal society were not passive bystanders. Their skeletons show robusticity, muscular development and trauma patterns, consistent with shared physical labor and even participation in hunts. Women gathered plant foods, crafted tools, prepared hides, and navigated treacherous terrain alongside men. More disturbingly, trauma analysis reveals that Neanderthal women may have been subjected to violence not just from the environment or animals, but from their own kind. Cranial injuries, facial fractures, and postcranial trauma affect females at some sites, possibly suggesting savage, barbaric competition among females. This pattern raises uncomfortable but important questions about social structure, power dynamics, and survival in a harsh world. In the shadowy corridors of deep time, long before written memory or the taming the wilderness, 3 archaic human beings bore witness to the brutal rhythm of survival. Each of them was a woman, and each carried on her skull the signature of trauma, a wound etched in bone that whispered of danger, confrontation, and endurance. The CESAIRE Neanderthal from France, KRAPINA 3 from Croatia, and the enigmatic MABA skull from China are separated by thousands of miles and tens of millennia. Yet they are united by the unmistakable marks of violence and survival. Through their injuries, we glimpse the perilous lives of archaic women who walked the edge of extinction in a world ruled by cold, predators, and each other. Discovered in 1979 in southwestern France, the CESAIRE Neanderthal, designated CESAIRE 1, was initially celebrated for its unusual context. Found in association with Châtelperronian tools, a transitional industry once thought to be exclusively the domain of modern Homo sapiens. The fossil, dated to around 39,000 years ago, was that of a young adult woman, based on gracile features and other indications. This was one of the last known Neanderthals, living during a time when Homo sapiens were encroaching upon their territory in Western Europe. But what stunned paleoanthropologists even more than the cultural implications was the trauma inscribed on her skull. A clean, deliberate slash extended across the right parietal bone of her cranium, a deep 7-centimeter cut consistent with a weapon bearing a sharp edge, possibly a flint blade hafted into a wooden handle. This was not the result of a fall or accident. It was an act of violence, possibly interpersonal, perhaps even intimate. Remarkably, the wound showed signs of healing. Bone had begun to remodel itself, indicating that the young woman survived the encounter for weeks or months after the injury. In a world without antibiotics, painkillers, or sutures, such survival suggests care. A community that tended to her, brought her food, and kept her safe as her body fought to recover. This juxtaposition of violence and compassion encapsulates the Neanderthal experience, capable of brutality, but also of empathy. Travel back another 90,000 years to the windswept hills of KRAPINA, Croatia. Here, in a rock shelter overlooking the Krapinica River, excavations in the early 20th century unearthed the remains of more than 80 Neanderthals. Among them was KRAPINA 3, a female distinguished by her relatively gracile cranial features and comparative size. KRAPINA 3 bears one of the oldest known signs of cranial trauma in the fossil record. A shallow but distinct depression is visible on the frontal bone of her skull, evidence of a healed blunt force injury. Unlike the sharp-edged wound of CESAIRE, this injury was likely caused by a rock, wooden club, or accidental impact. Its location on the frontal squama suggests a face-to-face encounter, potentially a scuffle, a fall, or something more sinister. What makes KRAPINA 3's injury so remarkable is not just its antiquity, but its healing. The bone had clearly begun to fuse and repair, meaning she survived the blow. And like the woman from CESAIRE, this recovery would not have been possible in isolation. Someone must have cared for her, shared food, protected her while she was vulnerable. The KRAPINA site is also associated with symbolic behavior, modified eagle talons, deliberate tooth removal, and traces of pigment. If true, it suggests a population with complex social structures, capable of violence but also ritual, empathy, and meaning-making. KRAPINA 3's wound stands as testimony to both the dangers and the bonds of her people. Half a world away and older still lies the MABA skull, discovered in 1958 in a cave on a hill known as Lion Rock in southeastern China. Initially thought to belong to a Chinese variant of Homo heidelbergensis, the MABA specimen has defied simple classification. It displays a mosaic of traits, a robust brow ridge and cranial shape reminiscent of Neanderthals, yet with some modern Homo sapiens features in the vault and base. Estimated to be between 130,000 and 230,000 years old, MABA represents a critical puzzle piece in understanding East Asian archaic humans. Some researchers now consider it part of a Denisovan-like population, while others place it on a divergent Homo sapiens trajectory. What is undeniable, however, is that MABA suffered a traumatic injury. The frontal bone bears a crescent-shaped depression, a healed blunt force injury nearly 15 millimeters over half an inch long and visibly indented on the outer and inner surfaces of the cranium. Like KRAPINA 3, the damage likely resulted from a heavy object, whether a club, a fall, or an aggressive encounter. And like her Western sisters, MABA survived. The healing is significant, indicating the injury did not cause her death and that she lived long enough for the bone to remodel. Whether she was a Neanderthal, Denisovan, or another archaic lineage, her survival again points to a social group capable of compassion, aid, and protection. Even in the relative isolation of East Asia, archaic humans shared the capacity for both violence and care. The wounds suffered by these three ancient women span types, cultures, and continents. CESAIRE was slashed by a sharp weapon, KRAPINA 3 was struck by a blunt object, and MABA sustained a crushing blow. The differences in their injuries may reflect different causes: interpersonal violence, hunting accidents, falls, or perhaps conflict with animals. But the unifying thread is their survival and the clear evidence of healing. From a comparative perspective, Saint Césaire's injury is the most overtly violent in intent. The clean cut implies a weapon wielded with purpose. KRAPINA 3 and MABA could plausibly have suffered accidental trauma, though the frontal location of both injuries hints at face-to-face confrontation. In terms of classification, CESAIRE and KRAPINA 3 are both unambiguously Neanderthals. Their cranial morphology, tool associations, and geography place them within Homo neanderthalensis. MABA, however, is more elusive. Her skull shape suggests a parallel or hybrid lineage, possibly Denisovan or Neanderthal, or a regional archaic Homo sapiens. Yet all three fossils testify to the physical dangers that shaped archaic life, especially for women. But even amid this brutality there is compassion. The healed injuries of Saint Césaire, KRAPINA 3, and MABA reveal that archaic women were not discarded when they were wounded. They were tended to, healed, and permitted to resume life. This suggests not only social bonds, but also a level of humanity too often denied to our ancient kin. The skull is both a record and a relic, a living diary of trauma, endurance, and care. In the bones of these three ancient women, we find the echoes of a world as dangerous as it was social. Their wounds are not just medical data. They are stories of struggle, resilience, and the indomitable spirit of those who came before us. Saint Césaire woman was likely struck down by someone she knew, then lifted up again by hands that cared. KRAPINA 3 endured a blow that could have ended her, but her body fought back, and her community stood by her side. MABA, shrouded in mist and myth from the east, lived through a crushing injury, and like the others, bore her wound into the afterlife. In these three skulls, continents apart but spiritually close, we glimpse the terrifying beauty of life in the Pleistocene, red in tooth and claw, yet cradled by compassion. The dangerous lives of Neanderthal women were not unlike the lives of women across time, marked by hardship but illuminated by survival.